we're joined now by our friend Mike Schaefer from Husker 24/7. What's up, Schaefer?
Not a ton. Congrats to Damon, 1-0. Only 114 more wins in the regular season. Should be a lot of fun. Excited to hear what Alden Gonzalez has to say.
Shape, I want to talk hoops real quick before we get into football. I am Ravi and I both agreed we're watching The Crown. I actually think it's pretty cool. We're watching March Madness at the same time. I cheer for Nebraska basketball. Can I be in your tree of trust, your circle? Can we be buds that I can say out loud that I want to watch more Nebraska basketball and not have people like throw things at me?
I think are you talking about The Crown? Like you're good. That's where I'm at with it. Like I would rather see more Bryce Williams and Nwaneri. Yeah. Like I've watched a lot of bad Nebraska basketball. I have celebrated a lot of bad Nebraska basketball. I, at one time in my life, was very fired up because Nate Johnson made a driving layup against Creighton in the first round of an NIT game. Because for me, that was postseason basketball when you're a Nebraska fan. So, like, I'm not going to scoff at them playing in the Crown. I'm not going to scoff at the idea that they could get some more opportunities to play. I'm not going to scoff that some of these guys that maybe the last, like, true, really important organized basketball that they get to play in their career. I don't know how important it is, but we can haggle over that. I don't have any problem with the Crown. I don't have any problem with bowl games. Like I just find it fascinating. There's people who feel like they have to declare really loudly, I am not going to watch this. Nobody cares. Just not watch it. Nothing like I hate to burst the individual bubble of the guy who's like, oh, I'm not going to watch this. You don't matter. Congratulations. Find something else to watch. Grey's Anatomy is on somewhere. Enjoy that with your wife. Maybe you can find WWE on Netflix. You know, there's lots of great options out there for you. Nobody cares that you're not watching it.
I just love
no one cares.
I kind of feel like this is the first segment. People just making proclamations on what they don't like. It's like,
it's okay. Not everything's for you.
Okay.
Not everything's for you. You know? I like your go-tos were WWE and Grey's Anatomy.
Grey's Anatomy. Yeah, you got range.
I wanted to get both ends of the spectrum there. You know, basketball kind of slides into the middle, and then you get the two ends. I don't know where Grey's Anatomy came from exactly, but John Cena's everywhere, so I know where wrestling came from.
All right, so last hoops one's for me. So as a lifer, like as a fan, but also being in the media, Shafe, how would it resonate with you if Nebraska just kind of rearranged the deck chairs versus you seeing a real plan to do something different than what they've been doing?
I don't anticipate that they're going to do a ton different. I think they have, rink mass. They have Connor Essegian. They're going to build around that. We'll see if Burke's back. I'm not expecting a brand new starting lineup of people I've never seen before. I'm expecting Fred Hoiberg to.
Gavin comes back.
I would be okay with it. I mean, there's talent there. I want to see someone unearth it. I think he's a good enough athlete. He kind of always looks awkward, and I don't know that will disappear exactly. I didn't mean to make you do a spit take there, but I'm not wrong on this. It does look a little awkward. It's not the smoothest thing that you're going to see all the time in the basketball court.
Awkward.
But I think there's talent there, and he was a highly touted transfer that you picked up. And I just don't believe that everyone has to be immediately good out of the transfer portal, or you just throw them away the next year. Sometimes you invest in players for multiple years. I think it's more likely you see that in football, but also in basketball. I mean, I don't think there's a world where there are basketball transfers that have a struggle the first year, but then stick around, develop, and then have success. Like, I don't think that's an impossibility, but I don't know exactly what Gavin Griffiths would be. And so to me, it's how do you best surround a team around rink mass? I think you got to get some rim protection. I think you have to get some more athleticism somehow. These last 2 years, it feels like Nebraska is a little bit, a lot of bit less athletic than the teams that they play, other than maybe Bryce and Jawan. And you're losing those two guys. So, I don't have this like master list of things that they have to go get, but I am really curious what Fred fills the shopping cart up with, so to speak.
Dave, what's your level of confidence right now on March 18th, 2025, that after 6 years, like there's enough evidence that Fred Hoiberg will be able to elevate this program past where we've seen it historically?
If we use like a 10 scale, it's probably like a 6.5 or somewhere around there. I got in trouble for saying this on this program a couple of weeks ago. I think Fred Hoiberg is as good of a coach as I've seen at Nebraska. I understand that he's not Danny Nee in terms of putting together the NCAA tournament runs of the early 1990s. I think basketball looks a little bit different since then. I think Hoiberg's resume speaks for itself. I believe in what he put together over these last couple of years. I believe that he can continue to put Nebraska in position that they're either on the bubble or a tournament team more often than not. For me, the goal that I kind of have is 3 out of 5 years Nebraska's in the NCAA tournament. There's other 2, they're in the conversation. I don't think that it's realistic to expect them to be a tournament team every year, but I think they're trending in the right direction, despite the fact that they lost all of those games at the end of this season. Like, I just don't think the 5-game losing streak, or if you will, the 6-game losing streak, or both of them combined, are representative that Nebraska basketball is going in the wrong direction. I think having Bryce Williams as a first team all Big Ten player shows that he can identify talent. I think what Rink Mass did the previous year shows that he can identify talent. I think the fact that they have had teams that have been successful in quad 1 games at a higher clip than we're used to shows that they can have success. I just don't think I don't think the bottom's falling out here, guys. I just think that they need a little more than they got in the past year, but they were in the conversation. And realistically, that's what I'm asking for. And is that too low of a standard for others? Maybe. But again, we're talking about a team with 2 tournament appearances in 25 years. Like, what is realistic here? For me, 3 out of 5 would be the best 5-year stretch in Nebraska basketball's history for 30 years. I mean, at some point we have to acknowledge this isn't as easy as we want to make it seem to be.
Yeah, I did want to. I mean, when you said 3 out of 5, that's literally only happened one time in Nebraska basketball history.
Right. And so, like, I don't think that's that low of a standard, but to some people, it's, you're just ceding the entirety of basketball to other programs. Like, I look at Nebraska and Indiana have like the same amount of tournament appearances since 2013-14. Like, it's hard to get to the NCAA tournament out of the Big Ten, and Indiana has every advantage in basketball. Like, that's why the whole Indiana basketball, Nebraska football comparison works so well, because the better sport of the two seems to come up short over and over and over. But I don't know. I think Fred Hoiberg can get them there. I really do. If other people don't see that and they're stuck on his conference record, there's nothing I can do about that.
Hey, Mike J., let me transition over to football with kind of the level of excitement. You said something earlier that I thought was interesting about, I think it's a little more easier. I sound like Ravi from earlier, more clear. I think it's easier in football for a year 1 or 2 transfer portal guy to not pop like the first year. We're typically a little more patient in football than we are in hoops. Do you see that with a few of the guys that have come over in the transfer portal with this class in terms of when they may pop?
Like the most recent class?
Coming into this year.
I think that's a possibility. I mean, I think some of what you're doing when you're building a transfer portal class is you're attacking the immediacy, but then you're also picking spots or players that you're just interested by. There's something about Gabe Moore that made this staff think, okay, this is a guy that hasn't played a down of college football in his career, but physically we like something here. Mentally, we like something here. Maybe he just ends up being practice fodder for us, but what if there's something we can unlock? There's a physical body here that we think we can get something out of. Let's see what it is. And maybe Gabe Moore's nothing. Maybe Gabe Moore's really good. we'll find out. It's going to be a little bit before we get there. Justin Rhett, I think, is a good example of this. He's a backup at Georgia for multiple years, goes into the portal, doesn't have a lot of film to his name, and yet Nebraska adds him to a crowded defensive backfield because they want to see what they can get there. And perhaps Justin Rhett becomes a player, not necessarily in 2025, but in 26 or 27. They have an example right now on their defensive line in Elijah Judy, who hasn't done much in 2 years, but you're kind of hoping that now that he's been in the system, that he's become a veteran, that he knows what the standard of defensive line is at Nebraska, that he can help Terry Braden as he transitions to being Nebraska's defensive line coach and gives her in that he can put on the field. I mean, not every player that comes out of the portal is going to be Kyler Murray. Not every player that comes out of the portal is going to be a star. Sometimes you're going to have really good practice players. Sometimes you're going to have a good key contributor in certain situations. It's maximizing your roster and giving yourselves opportunity to fill in if you miss on development in terms of high school guys. I think it has to be viewed in that lens.
When you heard him talk about development and freshman year versus or first year versus second year versus contributing, he kind of walked that timeline, and I get it. It was within regards to the O-line. I think it was question specific. Do you feel that is kind of a thing as he looks at how to get guys out of the portal as well?
Yes, I think that's a possibility. It just sort of depends on where they fall and what Nebraska's specific need would be. I thought that was my favorite quote from last week. He said, paraphrasing here, but he basically walked through freshman year, you redshirt, sophomore year, you're a backup. By the third year, you're a contributor or a starter on the offensive line. That was the model that successful teams had used. And that's, I think, ultimately the model that Matt Rule wanted to use. Now, college football has changed where players expect to play earlier. Players can play earlier. They're more physically ready to play earlier. Are they mentally ready to play earlier? Nobody talks about that, but that's an aspect of it.
That's the most important thing, Schaefer. That's my thing. Just the emotional rigor to do something every day with this staff. Like, they don't cut a lot of corners when it comes to holding you accountable on showing up, right? Like, that's
well, they treat them like adults. They treat them like adults, and they treat them like adults with expectations. And they didn't bring you here to coddle you. Not that previous staffs did either, but generally the idea is that they have this standard, they have this system that you want to work towards and to achieve, and then they want the players to help police it so that when a guy gets here and he's struggling, a teammate is the one picking him up rather than a coach has to kind of hold his hand to get through stuff. Not that they don't have to do that, but and not everybody's mentally equipped to jump in with both feet as an 18-year-old. I mean, some of these guys are going through spring practice right now. Like, they've never done any, or not right now, but they will next week. They've never done anything like this. And they've never done anything like mat drills. They've never done anything like this off-season conditioning. And that can be a challenge. Some people thrive in that environment. Other people need time. They need time to figure out, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is the energy that I have to have every day. This is the effort that I have to put forward every day. So it's there. When we talk about development, we talk about on-field, we talk about, linear progression. Sometimes the mental development is equally as vital for the health of a program. Because if you're not developing mentally, then it's hard to know that you're going to be able to go do it physically with any kind of consistency.
Schaefer, there's a guy I keep thinking about that I don't know that we've talked about a ton after he committed in the transfer portal class, and that's Williams Nwaneri. Like, ceiling-wise, probably as high as anybody in the transfer class, but I'm curious what you expect from him. Obviously didn't play a ton at Missouri last year, but I imagine that's going to be a guy people's eyes gravitate toward, just if for no other reason, the star rankings. Like, where are you at when in this developmental conversation on what's reasonable to expect from a guy with pretty high upside, but not really any track record?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting what situations he finds himself in. Is this a guy who's on the too deep as we get into August right away? Because then the expectation is that when he's on the field, he's going to be able to contribute at a relatively high level. I mean, if he's a starter, the expectation is that he's going to contribute at a high level. So it's going to be interesting to see when we get to August where a guy like that ends up, because sort of the advanced talking of him has been that he's really big physically, that he, is a unique athlete, that he passes the eye test, but he's got to be able to physically go and do it and have a good spring. And he's got to stack days for Nebraska. And then they're going to have to feel comfortable that putting him on the field is a better choice for them than putting some of these other defensive linemen on the field. So he's a guy with huge upside, but I don't know that we're going to see that manifest into being a big 2025. But I think he's someone that, like when Matt Rule talked about that with defensive line, if you extrapolate that to transfer portal or it's talked about it with offensive line, you extrapolate it to transfer portal and defensive line. I mean, if he is a backup this year, the idea in 2026 is Nwaneri could be a starter and could be a key player for you. And so I think that's the hope, or at least it is for me. I'm not expecting him to come in and replace Ty Robinson as a 1-to-1 comparison just because he was a 5-star a couple of recruiting cycles ago. I think there's a lot that he probably has to learn about being a big man in a big conference. And he went through it with the SEC, and he didn't get a lot of playing time. He's in the Big Ten now, and we'll see how it all goes.
When you heard Coach Rule go through the laundry list, he got it out of the way early of guys.
Love that too.
Okay, well, let's start there. So is that because it just makes it easier, like guesswork?
Well, it prevents the first day where Brunt sends me on a task to go take my little notebook and write down every yellow jersey. And then, if I don't know, if the number doesn't correspond to the player, then I'm trying to look through the helmet to guess who it is or whatever. So it's just less work for me. I mean, I'm just being honest here. It's just nice. He came out and he said it. I don't have to wonder, is that Amir Khan or is that Ramir Stewart? It makes my life easier. Hey, I'm selfish like the rest of America,
So does the format for the spring, or however they go about, did that put it more in perspective for you, dealing with or knowing what they're kind of dealing with situationally up front?
Yeah, I think anyone that was relatively paying attention to the situation knew that they were pretty light offensive line wise in terms of key spots. And then you go through that list, and we knew that Gunnar Katula and Turner Corcoran and Teddy Prohaska were going to be out. I don't think I knew that Henry Lutovsky was going to be limited. And so you don't have that. And then some of the other names, Khan, I don't think I knew was going to be out. Jalen George not being. So some of it for me was just noting which of the newcomers, like Dawson Merritt, he's not going to be able to practice. Pierce Mooberry, he's not going to be able to practice. But some of those transfer portal guys where they're coming from the FCS, in a weird way, it's like, man, that feels like it's a tough way to get your career started, because you're Jalen George. You already got a chip against you because you're coming from East Tennessee State. There's going to be all this competition on the defensive line, and you're limited. And so you're not going to be able to show off what you can do relative to everybody else until maybe the summer or August. So the big takeaway I had from that was a couple of those guys that were transfer portal additions aren't going to be able to help out Nebraska or showcase why they were brought in when they're kind of were two big curiosities in terms of the overall list.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting what you find, or what you may find, when Nebraska does their due diligence with medicals and kind of what has ailed guys that may have kept them from doing what they wanted to do and why they're even in the portal in the first place. And sometimes I don't know if I would always be willing to clean that up on my dime, but I think it is interesting that if Nebraska is investing in you in your totality, that sometimes getting surgery or whatever the treatment is once you get here is part of it. Not a lot of schools are willing to do that either.
Well, and if there's a thing that you think you can fix that hasn't been fixed, that's sort of a market inefficiency where you'd be like, hey, this guy's better than what he showed on tape because they weren't able to figure this out.
Let's just get this fixed.
It's like Steve Nash's back, right? He flourishes in Phoenix because they have the best medical staff at the time in the league, and all of a sudden he turns into a 2-time MVP because they got his back right,
Yeah.
Schaefer,
I concur. There's really nothing I can add to that. Once Steve Nash came in, what am I going to argue? The guy was amazing with the stunts. I didn't know that they were a revered medical staff, so I learned something today.
At the time, they were by far the best medical staff in the league.
I think, what's interesting is I'm surprised he kind of corrected it where he said limited. I don't think they let Lutovsky do much of anything because I think they knew in January that he was going to have to he was going to have to get some work done.
Yeah.
I would when he said, well, limited, I'm like, shoot, I don't know if I would. But I wonder what limited means, because he was very specific on out versus limited guys. So they've definitely done their due diligence and know kind of right where those guys are at.
Yeah, my assumption is limited is probably they do a little bit more with the yellow jersey. Out might just be that they're not even dressed in some cases.
So versus nothing at all.
There's going to be some good players that I think will have to move on just because they couldn't get right, which is going to be sad, but it's the day we live in. I'm cheering like crazy for Demetrius Bell.
That's the knee injury.
Yeah, uber talented, man. But that's a guy that I'm gonna champion.
You want to talk about someone that staff is invested in? I mean, they brought him over, knew that he could not play as a freshman because the academics weren't there. They knew that they were not new, but they thought that they were going to get a wide receiver that would be a steal relative to what he was ranked or who was after him at the end of it, and then he has that knee injury, and so now you're going to be 2.5 years in, and you really haven't seen him on the field, so you don't know exactly what he's like when the lights are the brightest. I mean, there's definitely, if he amounts to something at Nebraska, or if it ends up being somewhere else, you have to give a lot of credit to his perseverance and his willingness to fight through stuff that some players just aren't willing to do.
Yeah,
they're willing to do to a small extent, but they're not going to put in all the work that's required to come all the way back from all of these things that Demetrius Bell has gone through.
Mike J, I mean, look what he walked. He was going to be Barney before Barney, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then a year later, you walk into that room and you're like, holy smokes, this is kind of daunting.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at their wide receiver recruiting for 2026, and it's like, this doesn't feel the same as last year where they were in on 15 4-star guys because they needed that for the room. And now it's like, all right, we like Jabari Brady. We like Ryan Mosley. We'll see what else is
he
out there.
Today or yesterday?
Brady was there yesterday.
Oh, boy. Okay. So it's Missouri, OU, and Nebraska U?
Yeah, I mean, those are the teams that he's discussing at this point. Jabari Brady's kind of an interesting guy. He's 6'1", 6'1.5", or listed that way. I mean, actual height is probably somewhere an inch, give or take, either way. But he's 205 pounds. Like, he's a physical guy as a wide receiver. Because I was like, in my head, I thought he was a smaller receiver. I don't know why. Maybe it's just a name. I saw the name Jabari Brady, and I just assumed
I felt like that about
5'11", 175, and that is not the case.
Mosey not thicker than you? Mosey up close is thicker than I thought he was on tape.
I think he had a growth spurt. I saw him in April of 2023, and you were there. You were at the same thing. It was super windy. Yeah, it was a super windy day in Kansas City.
Yeah.
And other than Q39, kind of what I remember from the day, Isaiah Mosey was really good. He was not as big as he is now, and I'm fascinated what he's going to look like by the time he's done. Done in a few years as a wide receiver, but also even just getting into fall camp. Like I was standing next to him the other day and was just like kind of surprised. Like he was 5'9" at that camp. I swear to you, he was like 5'9", scat quick wide receiver. And now it just feels like he's 6 foot, 6.5 feet. He's kind of broad. I don't know where this came from. Apparently they continue to grow after you first see him. I don't believe it, but
Schaefer, I just want you to know as we let you go here that when your text came in to DB, he wanted to make sure that I knew that by about $4 million, the Dodgers do not have the highest payroll in baseball.
Okay. All right. I forgot that Shohei Ohtani only accounts towards $2 million of their payroll.
Why?
I completely forgot about that.
It's a little deferred money. So,
Knock it off.
We appreciate it as always. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks,
all right,
Mike.
guys. Have a good one.